So do you want to move on to egoism then?
Yeah, sure. This is actually something I was interested in talking to you about. So, when it comes to egoism, I guess I'll let you build your case first for why you believe in egoism before I attack it. So, why do you believe in egoism?
Okay, well, so my belief in egoism is actually logically, deductively arrived at. Um, so
Hmm.
as far as I'm concerned, it's completely irrefutable and
Hmm.
100% certain. Um,
Hmm.
and the reason why is because I was looking at praxeology and I was studying praxeology, and if you don't know, praxeology is essentially the study of human behavior.
Hmm.
And the Austrians kind of coined the term of praxeology, and it's this idea that there are some things that we can know for certain about human behavior, and if we know these certain things, they call them like human actions or axioms of human action. We can know the ground level, the fundamentals, and from that we can build our case up. But
Hmm.
very simply put, I derived this selfish axiom or like an egoistic axiom,
Hmm.
which is the statement: the self does what the self wants. And so, what I'm saying here is that actions are driven by desires and preferences. So,
Hmm.
by definition, voluntary actions reflect what a person chooses or values most in that moment. And this includes
Right.
anything we would consider altruistic. But that's essentially
Yeah.
the axiom. It's pretty much tautological.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of because I think I watched one of your debates where you explained your egoist position after I made
Mm-hmm.
that comment, and when I said that I disagreed with your view on egoism, I think that yeah, because it's interesting because I think like we maybe I was just misunderstanding your kind of concept of egoism because generally like the way I understand egoism, I actually came up with like a hypothetical to kind of explain how I view egoism versus altruism is like let's imagine we were designing like two robots, right? One robot we're designing to be like an egoist robot, so it's very selfish in nature. It wants to maximize its own like pleasurable experiences, and it doesn't really care about like external beings insofar as it doesn't affect the like its own programming, and like that's its ultimate goal, just to maximize its own state of being, right? And so like
Mm-hmm.
if we imagine like an example where let's say that this robot exists in society is like it's going to work one day or whatever, and let's say that like it's running late for like some kind of event that it needs to attend to that's going to benefit its life. And let's say there's like a bunch of kids playing on the road or whatever, it's driving to work, and like by if it chooses to stop and wait for the kids to get out of the way, it'll be late, which it'll affect him like very like minorly amount. But the kids have no effect on the robot's life at all, so it doesn't really care about it. So it just runs over the kids and like to make sure that it doesn't get late for its job or whatever. But that's how like that's like the egoist robot, and then we compare it to like say like an altruist robot where we code it to like have a where like in the opposite side it seeks to maximize the pleasurable experience of all beings, not just itself. So, for example, like this in the same hypothetical situation, it wouldn't run over the kids just to maximize its own preference or like its own actions or desires, but just it would consider like the desires and the experiences of every single being. That's kind of how I view the distinction between egoism and altruism. But I think, under your definition, you would just say that both of these robots are egoist robots because ultimately they're doing a goal that they both want to do.
Yeah.
Do I have that
Yeah,
right?
you understand the position. Yeah, you understand.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also the way I would frame it is it's
Hmm.
hilarious. Like I love the hypothetical.
Yeah.
Um, the so what I would say is I would expand your hypothetical to include more
Yeah.
factors because it's a
Hmm.
very constrained kind of vision of that. So I
Yeah.
would kind of like I would widen the parameters of your hypothetical out to the entire
Yeah.
world, including all the factors. And I would say that the egoist robot would not run over the kids because
Hmm.
if the egoist robot ran over the kids, there would be a societal outcry. The constructor of the robot might go to jail. The robot itself would be deconstructed and destroyed. Whereas the
Hmm.
altruistic robot would benefit a million times more than the short term egoist robot, as you put it. So that's how I would put it. Um,
Mhm.
but the way I
Um,
view the world,
yeah.
sorry, you can respond to that real quick if you want.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I guess the where I would like I guess kind of change the hypothetical then to kind of evoke the difference is that like let's say because I what I was trying to get with that hypothetical is like let's say we presuppose that there would be no negative consequence that would come to the egoist robot itself. It would just be a negative consequence to other beings. You would
Hmm.
agree in that sense, and like from the egoist robot's perspective, it would be justified just to run over the kids, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of what I take egoism to be. I don't know. Do you know who Destiny is? I imagine you do, right? The debater
Yeah,
guy.
Destiny. Oh God, Destiny.
I would consider him to be like an actual fucking egoist because he's insane. Like he's actually expressed these kind of positions. I think he said at one of his debates, like way early on, he was like, I would kill like everybody on the world if it meant that I had like 3 seconds more to live or something like that. So I would consider
Hmm.
that to be like a fucking proper egoist. But like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. So this actually leads into my next point about the different levels of egoism.
Hmm.
So I would say that, and in the same terms that people who believe in moral realism believe that there are things that are right and they're wrong, the way that I
Hmm.
prefer to accurately describe it is there are intelligent egoists and there are unintelligent egoists. And so the
Hmm.
way I would describe it is the altruistic robot would be the intelligent egoist, and the robot that runs over the children would be an unintelligent egoist. And it kind of
Hmm.
ties into this idea of like economics and praxeology, where you have people with high time preferences and low time preferences. And
Hmm.
people with low time preferences view the world in a much larger, big picture type of way because they're looking
Hmm.
out at the future implications of what their actions may apply to. So, a
Hmm.
low time preference person is somebody who will invest, they will eat healthy, they will exercise, they will be respectful to people around them. And the reason why this is, the reason why they're intelligent egoists is because they're looking out for their long term self interests. They're looking for how much money they're going to have in the future. They're looking at how society will view them, how well their status will be versus somebody with a high time preference who consumes all the time, who thinks about, I want to eat some birthday cake. And it's like, yeah, but
Hmm.
you might have a stomach ache after you eat all this cake, or you might gain some pounds after you eat this cake. The high time preference person consumes and they value the present more than they do the future. So they would be unintelligent in my view. And
Hmm.
that's kind of how I, dichotomize the differences between these two people.
Yeah, I guess it's maybe I don't know if it's like kind of I guess a difference between like um yeah, I guess what you're saying makes sense. Like yeah, I think the difference between your view and kind of the view that I sort of think of as egoism is like I guess maybe the difference between like an ethical form of egoism versus like a psychological one where it's like your kind of just argument is just that it's like the egoist position is basically the idea that it's like a descriptive fact that we have
Yeah.
like these desires that we want to do certain things, and even if it's like it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's like self-fulfilling, but it's just we have a desire to do it, even if it's like for example like sacrificing ourselves to save someone else because we had that desire to do it. That's like a sort of like a egoist sort of goal.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that first off, we should acknowledge the truth, and the reason why is because I
Mhm.
believe the truth is the path to the
Mhm.
future that we want, the future that maximizes well-being. If you understand the
Mhm.
nature of the world, you can find a path to maximize well-being. And so I think that first we need to acknowledge that we are all inherently selfish and that we are nothing but selfish. We need
Mhm.
to acknowledge that axiom, and that way we can accept our true nature and then control ourselves and understand ourselves. So this would be a form of emotional intelligence where you need to understand how you operate, and then in a
Mhm.
very stoic kind of way, you need to start controlling your actions so that you get the best long-term outcome for yourself. And the thing about low time preference people is they always benefit everyone around them. They have to, because in order to benefit yourself long term, you by necessity have to benefit the people around you. You have to be respectful in society. You have to have a high status, which is gained through hard work and status. You have to make lots
Mhm.
of money, which people respect. So you have to go to your job. You have to be respectful. You have to do your job well. You have to serve other people's interests. And in this
Mhm.
way, when you are serving your ultimate goal, which is yourself, you are ultimately also serving other people.
Mhm.
So we should all
Um.
be intelligent
Yeah.
egoists.
Yeah. I guess. Yeah. I don't disagree because I think like fundamentally the position that you're kind of espousing is just kind of the idea that yeah we have descriptively we just have a desire to do like we to follow our desires and it's like
Mm-hmm.
and I agree with that.
And then the ethical egoism
Yeah.
comes into play after what I just said.
Right. Right.
If we all accepted our nature and then we all adopted a low time preference for the future, this is the whole ethical egoism thing where
Mhm.
the belief is if people were egoists and they knew their nature and they planned out for it, the world
Mhm.
would be better. It would just be a better place.
Well, so when you say that like the ethical egoism comes into there, because like if I gave you the hypothetical of like, for example, the idea of you could do cause some kind of harm to someone else in a way that wouldn't have any impact on your life. So for example, the when I gave you the example of the robot running over kids so that it doesn't get late for work. And it doesn't actually have ultimately we presuppose that it just doesn't have an impact on its own life, maybe like somehow it managed to not get in trouble for it whatsoever. Like do you think that that's a like the that follows from your view, like would you agree with that sort of
Yeah, so
situation?
I would say in theory, this is
Hmm.
true. What you're saying is true in theory, but I would say in
Hmm.
practice it's not true because
Yeah.
say we do pose the hypothetical that
Hmm.
you kill let's say 20% of people in a country across the world and you know for
Hmm.
certain that it will have no impact on you whatsoever, nothing economic, financial, you won't have any guilt, you will nothing
Hmm.
like this will happen.
Hmm.
And if you kill those 20% of people, you will be like, you'll get like, $20,000 or something like that. The
Hmm.
correct position as an egoist would be to do that. You would,
Yep.
kill the 20,000 people so that you benefit and there would be no negative repercussions to you whatsoever. But like I
Hmm.
was saying back before,
Yeah.
there's laws to the universe that we must abide by. And one of those laws is that like everything is interconnected, like all atoms, kind of have an effect on each other across the entire universe. And as a determinist, you understand that there's billions and billions of factors all across the universe that affect each other. They have ripple effects.
Yep.
So in the hypothetical, it's true that the egoist would be benefiting, but practically speaking, if you did something like murder 20,000 people across the world in a little country, the
Yeah.
truth is you probably would be negatively impacted from that in some way. Most
Yep.
likely economics, but
Yep.
there's lots of ways. It will probably negatively affect you socially. It'll affect you economically, and the reason socially is not because like people will know what you did and then shame you. What I mean by
Yep.
socially is it will have if people learn that like 20,000 people die and this is reported on the news, it will make the
Yep.
world as a whole sadder and that sadness will somehow make its way to you in some sort of ripple effect. And in the same way that, or also in economic case, 20,000 less people in the world means 20,000 less people in efficient working in the marketplace, meaning less benefits for you, less technology, less
Hmm.
efficiency, things like this. So there's practically speaking, there's a lot of negative repercussions to doing things that almost seem like they wouldn't even affect you.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely agree with some of that. I think that, yeah, I think we might have some clash here just in terms of the ethical sort of egoist entailments. And yeah, so this is like the kind of interesting argument I was hoping we'd get into is so I don't know, are you bit of a tangent or like question, but are you familiar with like desert ethics?
No.
No? Oh, okay. Very simple. It's like kind of the basis for like how most libertarians and ANCAPs justify their sort of like ethics. I don't think it's the case for you because you're like a consequentialist, but like
True.
desert ethics is essentially the idea that people have gain a right to something based on like they deserve it based on like their actions, right? So it's like, this is like like the homesteading principle that a lot of that ANCAPs propose is like a form of desert ethics. It's like I mixed my labor with this land, therefore I deserve like a right to the land because I did something to it, and I put in my work and my labor onto it, and therefore it's like I deserve it. That's basically desert ethics in like a very simplistic way. Um,
Okay.
and I had this. I kind of brought up this point against Sithis in our debate. Although I don't think I did it that well. Could have done it. I could have explained it better. But we kind of talked about um, basically the idea of the self, because when it comes to egoism and when it comes to like desert ethics, which I think also is very interlinked with egoism. Um, I think that fundamentally the concept of egoism on an ethical level necessarily rests upon a presupposition of all of us have this concept of a self that we seek to prioritize over other persons in existence, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and my kind of argument is I don't believe this is actually like at all a rational view because
Wait,
I
wait, I'm
don't.
sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Could you repeat
sure.
that? Because I think that might not be true, depending on my axiom. You said that
Mhm.
people. What do you say? Could you say that again one more time?
Well, in my view, like one of the kind of implications of like a sort of ethical form of egoism is that there's a sort of value, like there's a sort of higher value placed on one's in like own person, one's own self over other persons.
That I disagree with. I would say in the selfish
Mhm.
axiom, the supposition or the presupposition that you would use is that you, let's say, you value your values more than you value anyone else's values.
Mhm.
So that's different
Right.
than yourself because, for example, we have
Mhm.
instances of self-sacrifice all across history. People
Mhm.
self-sacrifice all the time, but
Mhm.
it's not because they like their body more than other people's bodies or their self-interest more than other. No, self-interest isn't the
Mhm.
right word. They value the things they value more than people value those things. So
Yeah.
the people who sacrifice themselves valued that sacrificial legacy that they left behind, or because they loved the thing that they sacrificed for themselves so much that they
Mhm.
valued their love of that thing more than they valued anybody else's opinion of what they should have done with their body.
Yeah, yeah, and I think yeah, you probably put it in a better way. Like what I meant to say was more, it's like not like the self in terms of just valuing like your literal self like as a person, but like in terms of just your own, like, or at least like your own experiences, right? In a way, like because even with the case of like the self-sacrifice, it's like I guess you would argue that's like there is some experiential like phenomenon that's happening within the person that leads to them sort of having a sort of selfish a view or like benefit from sacrificing themselves, right? I guess
Yeah.
that would kind of be your view.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Maybe it's like
All
something
right.
spiritual or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so my kind of argument, and around this argument with said this as well, is like I don't believe in the existence of like individual persons, and I don't think there's like a good I don't think there's any account of persons that actually exists. I think it's like entirely like a social fiction. And
Wait, do you believe in consciousness?
yeah, I believe in consciousness, yeah.
Do you believe that all the consciousness of people are like independent from one another?
So I believe in like we do have like yeah, I believe that there's independent consciousness like of beings. But what I mean by like persons, like basically my view is that I don't think that there's a way to rationalize the like differences in being such that we ought like value that I ought value or that I do value my own like consciousness or conscious experiences over others. And the reason for that is that I don't believe that, like, when I use words like I or you or like any kind of words that refer to like a particular person, I don't actually believe that there's anything that I'm pointing to there that actually exists meaningfully. Does that make sense, or do you want me to go
No, well,
deeper?
it doesn't make sense to me because um so at first it sounded like you said you don't believe that your conscious experiences is more important than other people's conscious experience, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I don't believe that there's any rational way that we could deduce that, just on the basis that I don't believe that there's any actual like a difference like fundamentally in terms of like the separation of persons, basically.
I don't know. So I don't understand when you say the separation of you don't believe there's a separation of persons.
Yeah.
Well, like how do you take consciousness into that and into account for that? Like, do you believe that we all have like one collective consciousness or something?
Um, so when it comes to consciousness, I mean, like, I do believe that there are conscious beings, and I believe there's conscious experiences. And when it comes to my views on an ethical level, I want to maximize those, like the positive conscious experiences, the good conscious experiences. But I don't really, the consideration of particular conscious experiences is irrelevant to my sort of moral, any kind of ethical determination. And like like the reason like for this is like, yeah, as I mentioned, like it's basically the view of the self. Like I reject that there is a coherent concept of the self, like fundamentally. And this is like I believe it's there's a book, really good book on this by a philosopher called Derek Parfit. The book of Reasons and Persons. I really recommend reading it if like pretty much I think it's like really good for any consequential or utilitarian to read, even if you're like an ANCAP. But it's basically it outlines that like if I were to ask like anyone or like you know, for example yourself, if I were to ask you like you know, what makes you the same person over time that you were like, for example, like 5 minutes ago? Do you think there's like any sort of like trait you could point to?
I think I see what you're saying. This is like
Yeah.
the parable of the ship of Theseus or something.
Yeah. It's pretty similar. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're saying like, um, are you the same person you were 20 years ago? Like, because
Yeah.
every single skin cell, every single cell in your body has been replaced by something new,
Yeah.
and are you the same thing that you were 20 years ago?
Yeah.
Um, oh man, it's I researched this a long time ago and I forgot the answer exactly. But
Hmm.
intuitively, the first thing that pops into mind is, well, you're not the same as you were 20 years ago, and you're not the same person you were 20 years ago. So you're a
Yeah.
completely different person than you were. So you don't believe in the self in the sense that we can ever maintain a form for longer than like a second that is this self, basically, right? Because we become something new every second.
Yeah, basically the way that I am talking about is that like, so throughout what we're really valuing when we say like if we say that like we value ourselves, it seems that we're actually valuing, if we agree that we're like essentially become different persons throughout time. It seems that we're actually valuing like a bunch of different people. If we come to the conclusion that there are different persons there, and so if that's the case, it just seems to logically kind of follow that like there's no reason why we ought value like you know, like my particular future person over any other future person's experience, or like or any other person's experience in general, because there is no like actual consistent concept of a person that we're valuing, that is myself or yourself.
Okay, but I'm gonna try to be nice about this. But like, doesn't your ideology kind of contradict itself in this way?
Why do you think so?
Well, because like, if you don't believe in selves, if you don't believe in individual persons,
Hmm.
why do you believe that we should like? Uh, well, I don't know. Like, how do you create a basis for anything? Like your entire worldview of like welfare, like state welfare. And I know this is a different topic, but
Hmm.
I'm interested in your core belief of
Hmm.
maximizing well-being when you don't even believe in the self. Like, what is there to maximize the well-being of if the self doesn't exist? Then there's nothing
Yeah.
to maximize the well-being of.
Well, so as we mentioned, I think that there is still there are like, even though I don't believe in like in particular persons, I believe that there is a large like variety of conscious experiences that are being had, and my goal is to maximize the positive conscious experiences and minimize the negative ones. And so it's not about any particular person's like conscious experience, but it's just like on aggregate. like
So
just all beings.
do you just reject the term self and believe that there are independent conscious experiences that are like walking around on Earth, or what?
Yeah, I reject that there's any concept of like actual particular persons that we can point to that that's such that we can say that like I value this particular person's like conscious experience, basically.
Okay. But if that's the case, then this just seems like a definitional thing that you reject a specific term because you reject the idea that the self can maintain um, a state of permanency for more than 1 second. So it seems like if we change the term person to a more abstract definition that fits the conscious experiences, the individual conscious experiences that are walking around on Earth, you would be fine with calling that a person if we change the definition to that, right?
Um, so what would be your definition?
So if
Oh,
we're just saying that you do believe that like I am a conscious and ever evolving conscious experience with a physical body that is like walking around on Earth, like you believe that that's true, right?
yeah, I believe that there is a conscious being that in a like kind of like a social fiction where sense we're using to that we use the word you to refer to as, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
why couldn't you just make the definition of person more abstract and then put the label on me like that? Like call me a person in a more abstract way.
Uh, I'm not sure I get what you mean there. Like, what
Well,
do you mean by?
it seems like the only thing it seems like you do believe that there are individual consciousnesses that are walking around on Earth interacting with each other. It seems like your only
Mhm.
qualms is with the term self.
Um, So I believe that there are like individual conscious experiences, but my point is that like yeah, when it comes to and I think the significance of the argument is that if we recognize that when it comes to the self, that we're actually like for example, like I think you kind of sort of admitted this yourself, is that like we're talking about for if who you are today versus who you are 20 years ago. You could pretty much you can make an argument that those are like two different people almost, right? And so it's
Yeah.
like the concept of the self. I mean, it doesn't really make sense to say that there's a person who's also multiple people, right? Like that's just kind of just like on its face contradictory, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like um if there are individualized conscious experiences, but I don't think that that necessarily like negates the like basically the idea is that even though there are individualized conscious experiences that there's also my basis on like is the idea that the actual persons that we that there is no like sort of unifying sort of concept of personhood or self that ties those conscious experiences together. Does that make sense?
Do you know what heuristics are?
Heuristics?
Yeah.
Um, uh, Generally, yeah, but I'd have to know the way you're using it in the specific
Okay, so
context. Yeah.
a heuristic is like a sort of shortcut, especially like in what's the word? Like in like vocabulary heuristics or in like linguistic heuristics would be a good example, the accurate word. In linguistic
Mhm.
heuristics, essentially the idea is like we use words to try to encapsulate a concept or an idea, and
Mhm.
we try to do it in simple terms, and it can be what's the word I'm looking for? Um, it's like it oversimplifies a otherwise complex topic. But there's a specific word
Mhm.
for that, which I forget what it is. But essentially, what it does is it oversimplifies a more complex topic. What I would
Mhm.
say is that you are getting to the root of a metaphysical question
Yep.
about human consciousness.
Yep.
But what I would say is that people heuristically use the word person as an abstract term to
Mhm.
label and identify the things that you and I are, which is we are walking around and we're doing things. So I would just say that maybe you are right in the idea that the word person is too simplified of a definition to
Mhm.
encapsulate the ideas that you're talking about, but I don't think it meaningfully changes your argument about the idea of um of the root of what I'm talking about, which is whether you believe that you are a self or you're a conscious experience, that doesn't change that you have values and preferences.
Um, well, sure. I guess, but the question there is, so like when you say that we define person in like an abstract way, where we like have well, like we know that way we have some sort of reference point for to determine what is like you or I. I guess what I'm rejecting is I don't think we actually have that reference point at all. Like I'm like because I would challenge you. Like I would ask you right, like because it seems that before you kind of sort of granted what I my central point was that I don't believe there's a kind of commonality we could point to that demonstrates as the actual like a continuity or like a unifying sort of characteristic that binds those conscious experiences together into like one self or like you or I.
I don't understand the challenge because like you wake up
Mm-hmm.
every day and you do shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like what would you say is acting? Would you say that anything is acting?
I would say there's a conscious experience being had for sure.
What would you call that?
Um, what would I call that?
What would you call yourself if not a person? What would you call yourself?
Um, I mean, like I would say that on a definitional, I would say that I'm like a being, I guess, of some kind,
Okay.
a conscious being.
So so what I'm trying to get at is
Mhm.
all I have to do is switch out those two words and say
Mhm.
that instead of a person, I'm a being that has a conscious
Mhm.
experience, and that would change
Mhm.
everything, right? Like that would essentially get back
Well,
to the root of my argument.
I guess if you're just using the word person to be interchanged with the concept of just a conscious being, then it seems that I guess the point is then that it's like there's no actual sort of separateness between like it's so for example, if I say that um an individual like a conscious being is like woke up in the morning, like that refers to literally like what billions of people at once.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the difference, I think, is what I'm like disputing. Is that there when it comes to like the actual separateness of persons, like to the point where I can say like I as like a separate like like Bexy, the person that's like speaking or whatever, like I as a separate being have like these like sort of this sort of idea of a self where like there's a like over like a very long period of time there's like many different conscious experiences that I'm having. There's no, my argument is just that there's no unifying sort of trait or like common sort of the characteristic that binds that such that I could call myself like I as a person. And the implication of that in terms of the sort of egoist argument is that if we agree that each like version like that basically that there is no such thing as like an actual like separateness of persons, then we're just looking at individual conscious beings and we're just trying to maximize the experiences of individual conscious beings and not any particular individual conscious being, like not any particular person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're
Yeah.
saying persons don't exist and you're saying
Yeah.
that my foundation relies on personhood, which you're correct, my foundation does rely on personhood,
Yeah.
but a lot of things rely on personhood. Things like value, things like preferences. Would you also reject the existence that values and preferences exist?
So when it comes to so the thing is that when it comes to preferences, I would look at preferences as essentially we'd go back to the idea of a sort of a conscious experience, right? Because a preference has some relation to the conscious experience that you're having. And so, when we talk about, for example, someone preferring like pleasure to suffering, what I'm looking at that is just like, okay, there is an experience being had that where the positive experience is, like for some sort of like pleasure is derived from some sort of experience, and then there's a sort of a negative sort of conscious experience that's derived from some other action or some other phenomenon that has occurred with like a with this conscious experience.
Okay, but would that experience of preference exist, or is it fake?
Uh, I guess um, I guess I'm not sure exactly in what way you mean.
Well,
Like,
okay, does value and preference exist, or is it not real?
does value and preference exist or is it not real? I mean, I would say that like my answer is kind of like it exists in the sense that there is a sort of conscious experience being had when we have preferences because we're deriving some kind of like positive experience when we have like a preference. So like for example, if I have a preference towards like eating a specific type of food and then I go and eat that food, there is a sort of psychological I think preferences do have some ties to our like actual psychology, right? It's not just like an ethereal thing or like there is like a sort of like a psychological sort of phenomenon that leads to like a positive experience in our conscious being. And so that's I would say that exists in that level, but I don't think that there's like a like if you're saying that there's like an individual person who has these individual like preferences, I that concept wouldn't be coherent to me.
Okay, so let me rephrase my question for the audience to hear. Um, Essentially, what I asked you is, I don't value and preference don't exist in a vacuum. They don't exist
Mhm.
independently of humans. So my question to
Mhm.
you is, if value and preferences exist, what
Mhm.
there must be something, there must be a valuer to hold a value. So what would you say that thing is, if not a person?
Hmm. Yeah, I was just when you asked that question, I was thinking that maybe we might be talking about values and preferences and like a different like we are meaning different things. I guess if you're like if the concept of preferences that we're using is like basically to refer to like an individual's I guess sort of like to essentially to like a sort of characteristic of an individual's person's identity, then yeah, I would probably say that the idea of a preference probably doesn't exist beyond the like positive conscious experiences that are gained when the preference is fulfilled. It's like a social sort of fiction, like similar to like the person concept.
Well, it's uh, I don't know what you mean by social fiction, but you believe that that individual exists, right?
Well, like I said, I believe that there are beings that have consciousness and conscious
Uh-huh.
experiences.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. So
but
that doesn't it doesn't get to the root of my argument, right? Because even if you use the word it doesn't matter if you use the word person or a conscious experience or an individual, you can replace those words into my argument and get the same result, which is that the self does what the self wants. You can say the person does what the person wants, or the individual does what the individual wants. Do you see what I'm saying?
well, so I think that like well yeah so this is what I mentioned I think before when I said that like I don't think that we that I necessarily have a disagreement just purely on the basis of your sort of descriptive account of egoism where it's just like okay there are beings who have who do these have these sort of like I guess a desire and that desire leads to the conscious experiences that I'm talking about that I want to maximize. My sort of challenge there when bringing up the personhood argument was to kind of contend with the sort of ethical egoist implications. Like, I just think that like if we don't have a current concept of personhood, I don't think it's possible to make any kind of like ethical egoist claims of placing value inherently on a particular person's experiences.
Okay. Well, to
Yeah,
be clear, when
yeah,
I make ought claims
yeah,
as a moral anti-realist, what
hmm
I'm oughting at is a value that I have. So I'm saying
hmm
there's a value, and then the ought is the methodology to achieving that value. So when I say that the self does what the self wants, and that we ought to do what the self wants. I'm giving
Hmm.
an ought claim as a methodology towards an ideal that I hold.
Hmm. Um, right. So is your would you say like your sort of anti-realist view is kind of like what is it called? I believe it's like just it basically just tied to preferences. Essentially, it's like how we
Yeah,
determine odds.
what's the name called? Um, I can look it up real quick. Integralism branches.
Yeah, I think I forgot who. I think it's Ask Yourself. I don't know if you know who they are, but I think they hold that view as just like all moral statements essentially just hold like boil down to like a statement about
A
preference.
motivism.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Motivism is kind of similar, I think. Yeah, it was just essentially like the idea of like, for example, if someone says you ought not kill, that's essentially the same thing as saying like yuck killing or boo murder. All right, like that's
Yeah, because
like the
it's
yeah.
as the famous Andrew Wilson always says, it's ick. It's all about the ick. As an emotivist, you believe that people value certain things, and what we consider morality is just people's preferences of things. And I think this is true. I think that whatever morality people hold, it's not actually morality. It's just something that they value, and they call it morality because what they think morality is just what they value.
Hmm. Um, yeah, that's yeah, yeah, that's a pretty standard view of anti-realism. Yeah, I guess yeah, when it comes to the value thing, like yeah, my I guess if I don't know if we want to get into like the meta ethical like discussion, like
I love metaethics. I'm a little
okay,
rusty, but I love it.
yeah, I'm like pretty like I'm still like I literally change my views on meta ethics like literally every week, like the more I learn, so
Yeah,
something that I
metaethics
need to read
are
up way more on.
they're a bit
Yeah.
tough.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah. I mean, like, because I think when if I was like to go to like when I was like an anti-realist, which I occasionally am when I flip back and forth between positions, like I do generally think I agree with that kind of concept of anti-realism, where it's just like, yeah, it seems that there's like a sort of it's just tied to like this sort of preferences that I have for like this particular ethic. When it
Hmm.
comes to like a sort of moral realist account, that's the argument that I find compelling there is just like this idea that like there's like these sort of stance independent reasons that we have for action that basically determines um kind of what is that the way that we determine what we ought to is based on like a sort of like a rationality in a way.
Yeah, that
And
makes sense.
yeah, so I can give an example of this this is also like this is like one of the things that kind of sold me on like that I kind of thought that like made me realize that maybe there's some like sort of moral sort of realist intuition where it's like it's hypothetical for like if we imagine a guy who has like a set of preferences like and his preference is he prefers to he like in on like most days on like every day of the week he prefers to not be tortured, okay, like most normal people. He doesn't like to be tortured.
True.
But but except this is the only exception for future Tuesdays. This is called the future Tuesday indifference example or hypothetical. So every future Tuesday, if you ask this guy, do you prefer to be tortured on a future Tuesday? He would say yes. And but if you ask him, would you prefer to be tortured on a current Tuesday? He would say no. And if you ask him any other day of the week, he'd say he doesn't prefer to be tortured except for that future Tuesday. The kind of argument that the way that this kind of what this kind of establishes that like it seems that there's something inherently kind of irrational that has been built, even though it's like from this person's preferences. Like, would you agree with that?
Wait. What's irrational about that?
Well, because so the because there's no reason for him to prefer like his only preference for torture is on a future Tuesday, but when that future Tuesday comes around and becomes current Tuesday, he no longer prefers it, and it's a completely arbitrary day of the week, right? It's like Like,
Yeah, the day of the week is arbitrary, but it's very
yeah.
simple what he's trying to do. He's trying to get out of the torture, so he puts it off.
I mean, but no, like where in the hypothetical, he's actually his preferences are actually that he wants to be tortured on that Tuesday, but it's only the future Tuesday. Um,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
yeah.
So,
It's not like he's just like
okay.
lying about it. Yeah,
Okay. So his preference is to be tortured on a future Tuesday, but
yeah,
it's always to be a future Tuesday, which he will never reach. So it's essentially infinite.
yeah. It's like it's always a future Tuesday, but as soon as that Tuesday becomes current Tuesday, he's like, no, okay, I
No,
don't
I don't want to be
prefer.
tortured on
Pretty.
today's Tuesday. I want to. Okay, I
Yeah, yeah,
see.
but it's like,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
So, what are you saying this proves that what exactly?
Yeah, so the basically the kind of idea that this example kind of sets out to establish is it kind of sort of gives a sort of like intuitive like evidential case for a sort of like stance independent sort of idea of that there can be like rational and like irrational reasons for action. Um, and so like even when it comes to like preferences, we see that they're like there we have this sort of intuition that you seem to share with me, where it's that like there's this preference that he has is like sort of for like a certain action is irrational, and it's like that's it kind of ties into like a sort of a concept of moral realism that I hold to, which is that I just believe that there's like a sort of stance independent sort of reasons for action. That's what I hold take moral realism to be.
Okay, I'm gonna be completely honest. I don't know how you made that jump, but what I
Oh,
want to
sorry.
know,
Yeah, that was confusing. Sorry.
yeah. So what I want to know is first of all, where is a rationality spotted in
Hmm.
the concept? Is it infinity? Are you saying that infinity kind of negates rationality, or what is it exactly about the future? He will never reach the future Tuesday, which he wants to be tortured on. Where is the irrational part there? I guess I want to know.
Well, I guess